The Conquer Worry Show, episode 14. Welcome to the Conquer Worry Show, the show dedicated to helping people who are struggling with mental health issues. If you are looking for stories of resilience, if you are looking for motivation and inspiration, if you are looking for strategies to conquer your worry, this is the show for you. Welcome to another episode of the Conquer Worry Show. This is a very special episode. We are going to talk about what to do when you receive that cancer diagnosis. We're going to interview a very special guest, Miss Joy Huber, who at a very young age, only 33 years old, was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And after 3 years of grueling chemotherapy treatments and suffering the complete loss of her hair, she has not only recovered, but started a movement that she calls Cancer with Joy. I can't do her work any justice. Why don't I go ahead and play the interview with Joy Huber? If you want to follow along on her website during the episode, her website is cancerwithjoy.com. I am excited to have Joy Huber on this important episode of the Conquer Worry Show. This episode is focused on what to do after a cancer diagnosis, and Joy is the perfect guest for this particular show. She is a stage 4 cancer survivor. She has been through multiple surgeries and chemotherapy. But after conquering her cancer, she runs a very popular website that can be found at cancerwithjoy.com. She blogs for the Huffington Post. She has been featured in Coping with Cancer magazine and on NBC TV, and she is the author of Cancer with Joy. Thank you for joining us on the Conquer Worry Show, Joy.
Well, thank you for having me. It's really an honor to get to be with you.
So we like to start our interviews by getting to know a little bit about our guest. Tell our audience some things that maybe they wouldn't know about you.
Oh, wow. Okay. Let me see. You know, one thing that people do not seem to know, or they seem surprised to find out, is, like you just said, people know that I've started Cancer with Joy, and I'm a stage 4 survivor, and they say, okay, we know you wrote this book, you know, and you blog on the Huffington Post. That's how a lot of them find me. And they know I speak to groups, but most people do not know that another way I actually express myself, I'm a very expressive person, is I am a songwriter. And now when I tell people that, they always get all excited and they say, well, what have you written? And I'll name off some songs. And then, of course, they cut me off and they say, no, what have you written that like I would have heard on the radio? And I say, well, nothing, you know. So then they're a little bit disappointed to find out that I'm not behind a Katy Perry hit or Tim McGraw or, you know, something Justin Bieber's doing. And I say, no, sorry, folks, you know, I'm a little more at the hobby level, but, you know, something I'll actually try to talk a little bit more about later.
Okay, that sounds great. So we also like to know, our listeners are very curious how people conquer worry. How do you personally conquer worry?
Okay, yeah, great question, because, yeah, definitely when you get diagnosed with cancer and stage 4 cancer as a young adult, I can tell you I have been there, and that definitely brought about a lot of worry, fear, and anxiety. You know, I'd say probably, I guess, a couple things that I find myself doing that really kind of help me. One thing I actually do is, you know, I kind of ask myself when I'm getting really anxious or really fearful. Sometimes, you know, and I wrote about it in the book, because sometimes what we find is, you know, knowledge is power. And so I would ask myself, for example, before I'd have a surgery and I'd find myself getting very anxious, I'd be like, well, would getting more information help you out? if you knew more about what they're going to do. And, and I think if you ask yourself that question, and say, well, yes or no. And, at one point I thought, if I could get some more information from my doctor or the nurse about what is going to happen. And so I requested more information, thinking knowledge is power. And I started looking through this, and then it actually hit me. I'm like, you know what? You're not going to be awake. It's like they're going to knock you out, you'll have anesthesia and you'll be out of it during this procedure. And I kind of changed my mind because I'm like, I don't need to know, I'm going to be out of it. So, I think that's one thing is just ask yourself if getting more knowledge will help you, kind of conquer that worry or kind of conquer that fear. And that's one thing I've done a lot, throughout anxiety building before chemos or before surgery.
Education. I love it. So
yeah.
Let's get to your cancer diagnosis. What would you tell our listeners about the thoughts and emotions that you experienced during those first few days after your diagnosis?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, to be honest with you, the first thing I think I still thought when I was diagnosed with cancer is, to be perfectly honest with you, I thought you're going to die. And, you still hear that word cancer and that fear creeps in, and especially when I did find out it was stage 4 as we continued to go through the testing, I was just bracing myself, kind of trying to prepare myself, I guess, for how soon, how much time do I have left? I really expected a doctor, or oncologist, somebody to say to me, you have so many months or whatever the case to make the most of it. So, that really preoccupied a lot of my initial emotions, was just almost this paralyzing fear of death and dying, and I would say shock too. I was 33 years old when I was diagnosed, and really I considered myself relatively healthy. I have those extra few pounds I could stand to lose, but really a pretty healthy individual, and so I think a lot of shock too in the beginning.
Well, based on what you know now and your perspective of your experience with cancer, what would you have done different? What would you go back and tell yourself to then?
Right. Oh, my gosh. So many things. Looking back at everything I've learned these past few years, I mean, honestly, I made so many mistakes. One of the things that I've written about that I really felt is I said, hey, when you're diagnosed with cancer, or really when you're facing any huge obstacle in life, I always tell groups I speak to, you're sad, aren't you? And people start nodding their heads. And then I say, well, let me explain what I mean by sad. And then I put it up on the board or, on a PowerPoint, on a screen projector, and I say, I define sad this way. The S is scared. You're scared, and the heads are nodding. And I go, the A is angry. Anyone angry right at diagnosis or, right when you get that? And of course you are. I mean, you're angry at the loss of your health. You're angry that maybe your friends or no one else is going through this. And then I define the D as you are downright depressed. I mean, honestly, so you're sad, but you're scared, you're angry, you're depressed. And I put in my book a whole chapter of do's and don'ts, recommended or suggested do's and don'ts at diagnosis, and how I wish someone would have given me that when I was diagnosed, because I did some of the don'ts that I ended up putting in my book, and then there's do's that I skipped. And I'll give you a really quick example of each. Let's see, one of the don'ts that I did is my number one don't, I say don't Google or don't go to the internet as your primary initial source of information. And we all do that. I even heard Robin Roberts, the anchor on Good Morning America, talking about getting on the internet and Googling when she had time to kill, in between doctor's appointments. And that is my number one don't. And so many people talk to me, they say, Joy, I just cannot stay offline. I saw my doctor on a Friday. He mentioned the word cancer to me, and he said, I need to set you up with an ENT, an ear, nose, and throat specialist. Well, that appointment wasn't until the next Thursday. So guess what I'm doing for practically a week? I'm Googling all kinds of things about lymphoma and does it kill? And, all this misinformation comes up. If someone's good at search engine optimization, they can get their content to pop up there quickly,
Yep.
And you really, really do freak yourself out unnecessarily. You really cause a lot of unnecessary worry and anxiety. Now, one of the resources I share in the book is a great website that no one seems to know about, and it's called cancer.net. People are familiar with cancer.org because that's the American Cancer Society's website, but cancer.net is actually phenomenal oncologist-approved information. So that's one of the don'ts. Don't Google, but if you can't stay offline, visit cancer.net for some great information. And then I would say, for an example of one of the do's, actually a bonus one I put in that chapter, it's on page 73, is do consider fertility. If you are in the age range you could conceive children and you think you may want them one day. Now, maybe a bit unfortunately, this is a do that I skipped because there was only 3 weeks from my diagnosis till my first chemotherapy treatment. Since I was stage 4, they kind of rushed me into chemotherapy. And there was a lot to do in the meantime, and just no one mentioned to me at age 33, I'd never married, I'd never had kids, and no one brought up fertility preservation, in the midst of taking a bone marrow sample and getting a port implanted, to deliver the chemotherapy through. So on page 123 of the book, I share a great resource called fertilehope.org, and it's a national Livestrong initiative dedicated to providing reproductive information, support, and hope to patients and survivors. So that's just a quick example. One of the don'ts, don't Google, and then one of the do's, possibly.
Those are two great examples. And I tell you, in my pre-work for this interview, I ran across a post that was from the Huffington Post. And it was a blog post you put out in January. And there was a line in there that really just stood out to me. And it's, no one is happy they have cancer, but you can have cancer and still be happy. And that's incredibly counterintuitive for somebody who hasn't struggled with cancer and maybe even for somebody with a recent diagnosis. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, this is kind of how I synopsize or explain cancer with joy. If you pull up this book on Amazon or, run across it, it's available for the Nook and in a lot of Barnes & Noble stores as well as my site. But, that cover, it just kind of grabs you. And I have T-shirts that also say cancer with joy. And, of course, before people get that I'm Joy, a stage 4 survivor, there's a double meaning to facing cancer with joy. People have questioned me about that. And, of course, there's haters out there who are going to hate, or comment or say something. Especially sometimes I've worked with the families that are in a terminal situation, and their loved one has been told that they have a very limited amount of time left. And, and understandably, those folks are angry and they say, what? They see that cover and they go, you want me to be happy that, my loved one has cancer? Are you kidding me? And I actually love to dialogue with those people. I just found myself intuitively saying, no, hey, guys, I've been there. No one's happy they have cancer. I get that. But what I really discovered along the way, even facing stage 4, even in my 30s, going through things like complete hair loss as a single young adult, I still discovered you can have cancer and still be happy. And so that's just the way I kind of explain this cancer with joy. And then people go, okay, I get it. I get it. It's all about how do you still have happiness, which everyone wants, whether you're facing cancer or, terminal cancer or whatever the situation, you want to be able to make the most of that time and those moments, that precious time that you have left. No one wants to waste time being miserable. And I used to, actually, people say, what did you do before you got this diagnosis? And I used to teach seminars, and I do public speaking, actually, before this. And as I was prepping for my seminars, I ran across my favorite definition ever of the word attitude in a book. And they defined attitude in this book as 6 words. It was the way you choose to respond. And when I read that definition, it just really grabbed me that you choose your response to everything, that happens in life. Whether it's good news, you choose that response, or it's bad news. And I think Jack Canfield, I believe it is, in the Success Principles, he's the chicken soup for the soul guy, he talks about this formula in life where E plus R equals O. And he says E is the event in your life, and he says O is the outcome. And E doesn't equal O. In his formula, he says E plus R equals O. And R, of course, is your response that you're choosing. So as I was reading this, he, talks about you have to realize it's not the event in your life, but your response to that event that really ends up determining the outcome. And, you hear laughter is the best medicine, and you hear things like mind over matter. So when I speak to groups, I just always ask them, quick show of hands, I say, how many of you think it hurt me to face cancer with joy, most days, and choose to respond positively and, try to laugh at myself or try to find the humor in the situation. I go, how many of you think it hurt? And people, just shake their heads. I see them shake their heads, no. And I go, any of you think it might have helped me? Show of hands. And the hands just go up. They're like, absolutely, mind over matter. So that's really the point, that you're not happy about cancer, obviously, but how can you have cancer and still have happiness? And that's really what plugging into this movement is just all about.
Well, as a follow-up to that, and that's a great way to approach anything in life, right? You have the right attitude and make sure that the outcomes aren't being driven exclusively by your response. But we have people reach out to Conquer Worry who've just had traumatic events happen in their life, or they just can't get out of that mental hole. And for somebody with a cancer diagnosis, there's the ups and the downs of the whole diagnosis process. Like you said, waiting for the next doctor appointment that's a week out. All the uncertainty. What would you recommend someone do to help somebody with those mental challenges?
Sure. Well, I think one big thing that I just found helped me, and that's what I share is my personal experience, just coming from someone who's been there and, like I said, who still found happiness, and still found joy and now just really wants to help others. I think the first thing that I did is you just recognize right up front, you just kind of acknowledge. I mean, just like life before cancer or just like life before whatever obstacle has suddenly presented itself, that your listeners are dealing with that's causing their worry, their anxiety, their fear or depression. I think you just recognize up front that just like life, there's good days and bad days. So, my life before cancer, it had its ups, it had its downs, and life after cancer, I just recognized up front, hey, there's going to be good days, A couple weeks after my last chemo, as my body had kind of processed that infusion and the medicine was kind of working its way through my system, I'd get to feeling a little bit better. And so I kind of found this window of opportunity where, hey, I'm going to feel pretty good. And then I just know, well, my next chemo's scheduled and they're going to hit me again, with an infusion, and I'm going to kind of go down, and there's going to be bad days or, days where I'm just fatigued or, feel very sick, kind of that nausea feeling. And there's a lot they can do these days about those side effects, I'll tell you that. So definitely, work with your medical team. But, I think if you just recognize and can kind of schedule accordingly, and like we just talked about, no one's happy they have cancer, and when I speak to groups at hospitals, I always tell them right up front, just so they don't think, these superhuman expectations, I always say, look, I don't and you won't face cancer with joy every single day. So just know there's going to be some bad or tough days, and that's okay. Give yourself permission to be angry or to say, you know what, today I am not cheery and happy. Today I'm throwing a pity party. I mean, there were definitely days I did that when I'd talk to a friend and I'd just hang up and I'd just be a puddle of tears. I'd be angry because I'm like, you know what? Like no one else my age that I know, but why am I the only one that has to deal with this right now? Bald head and the sickness and all of these side effects, and my friends that are in their 30s are like going out and having fun, and it just seemed like they didn't have a care in the world. So there were times I'm like, you know what? You just got to give yourself permission to be upset or to cry about it and kind of cry it out, or whatever the case, be angry, and then I would give myself permission to throw that pity party, and then I just realized, hey, life is too short, to stay stuck here. I don't want to stay stuck in this negative funk. Why waste my time, my precious time, feeling this way? So I'll tell you real quick, one thing that really helped me kind of snap out of it is I actually just have this activity I wrote about in the book, and I just call it a blessings activity. Or, you can call it gratitude or whatever we're thankful for. But I would just grab a blank piece of paper, and at the top I'd just write blessings, on a day when I thought, this stinks, my life is really tough right now, this is horrible. And I just start writing, what am I thankful for? And that inevitably would help me snap out of my funk. So much to be grateful for. Things like I have clean water readily available, for me to drink. I just crack open a bottle or go to the faucet, and you think about people that struggle, looking for clean water, or I have a roof over my head, or, I have friends and family that care, and people that are checking in. And, before not too long, you're jotting a few things down and you go, you know what, I've got it pretty darn good. I may not have hair, but there's a lot to be thankful for. And I did a whole chapter in the book on emotional and physical fitness. And I'll tell you one thing I reprinted on page 105 is the poem, What Cancer Cannot Do. And that really, really helped me. On the days when I felt like cancer's massive, those days I'd look in the mirror and see everything it had taken from me, mainly my hair, my shoulder-length hair, on those days when I maybe doubted, can I really conquer this thing? I just pull out What Cancer Cannot Do and read about everything it cannot take. And I just instantly felt better, so hopefully those activities will help your listeners that are going through this right now or supporting someone, going through it. They can share the link to this podcast, and, someone in their church or in their neighborhood or their coworker can hopefully listen into this advice.
Yeah, Joy, that is great advice. And let's shift gears just a little bit. Now, these cancer treatment programs are obviously grueling on the patient.
Yeah.
But those patients have families. And how would you recommend family members manage through that process themselves?
Yeah, okay. Well, and I was a single young adult when I was diagnosed, and so really my caregiver was my mom, and she actually helped me write a special chapter in the book because that's what I told her. I said, we've got to speak to this, this resource. I really wanted to be the essential resource at diagnosis that touched on everything you need, from do's and don'ts at diagnosis to emotional food for the soul to resources, to something for caregivers. And so, she helped me write this chapter and, oh gosh, so many things. But, one thing I would really recommend for the family or for the friends is open communication. So many people say, I don't know what to do or what to say. There's a couple of links, I share about caregiving and what you need to know, or, cancer when someone has cancer. But, I always just say, just let them know you're there for them. That goes a really long way. Just say, hey, I just want you to know I'm here and I'll be here for you during this journey. And, you can talk about this if you want, or you can talk about whatever you feel like, and you, a lot of times you don't have to say anything. Just maybe tell them you're a pretty good listener, and you're just open to hearing whatever they have to say or share. So I think you encourage that open communication. And I know one thing we specifically wrote about in the book is the skill of empathy. Which a lot of people, they get sympathy, saying, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry this is happening to you. And they keep saying, I'm sorry over and over. And I go, no, that's sympathy, not empathy. So we wrote about empathy, which to me is really discussing the emotions that people are expressing, without reacting to them. And I give an example in the book on page 111. I'll just share this with you real quick if that's okay. I said, what I mean by this is if the cancer patient seems frustrated, instead of reacting, like we might say, well, don't take your frustration out on me, a much more useful continuation to the conversation would be, it seems like you are very frustrated. Tell me more about that. And this helps the person calm down because they feel acknowledged. They've said, darn right I'm frustrated. Here's the deal. Why does it take 2 weeks to get into the doctor, for next steps? And then you're having a dialogue. So you're kind of talking about it. Another thing, a couple of resources, if I could share real quick, just from the back of the book. So much great stuff, I think of that's in this resource I want to share with you. But a couple good websites, caregiversforcancer.org, and that's going to be the number 4, cancer.org, and then caregiverslibrary.org are just going to be mountains of, great information, checklists, good resources there for those caregivers, for those friends and family. And then another thing, I guess the final thing I'll share here is I'm actually thinking of is I recommend a resource. I have a whole section on cancer support, and I recommend a resource in there called Immerman Angels. And it's immermanangels.org, and they actually try to match you up with someone just like you. So, for example, if you're an African-American female in your 50s facing skin cancer, they're going to look through their database for someone just like you and connect you with that person. Now, they don't give medical advice, but that person is like you, they're just further along down the road of treatment. And what they can kind of do is offer that rope of hope, And one thing I want to point out for caregivers is Immerman Angels offers caregiver mentors as well. And I think that's really important, for caregivers and friends is that you're going to need to find someone you can talk to, probably aside from your spouse or the person facing cancer. So you want to definitely reach out and get your own network of support surrounding you.
Okay. Those are great resources, of course, along with your book. Tell us a little bit about bright side effects. I think our listeners will find that interesting.
Sure. Yeah. Well, bright side effects, where most people see that, it's a subtitle of my book. So the book is titled Cancer with Joy, which we already talked about, grabs people. How do you transform fear into happiness and find the bright side effects? Now, I told you earlier, I'm a songwriter. My little secret confession, a lot of people don't seem to know. And one day I was on the phone or Skyping with a co-writer of mine. And I told him, I said, okay, I kind of have some big news to share, because he knew I was facing cancer and going through treatment, and I had lost my hair, or I was losing my shoulder-length hair. And I took this hair loss shower that was so painful, I just was like, one of my do's is do control what you can. And so the next day we went to have my head shaved because I thought, why would I let my hair, fall out like this? I'm going to take control of this and, just go get my head shaved. And so I was telling my co-writer, I said, I'm bald now. I said we went and had my head shaved and, my hair was coming out and it was really hard. And, I told him, I said, but you know me, and I try to kind of look on the bright side of things. And I said, there's actually a bright side to this side effect. Because I said, the hair is not regrowing on my head, but it's not regrowing anywhere on my body. And he kind of started laughing. And I said, no, what I mean is, I said, I shaved my legs, and I go, a couple days later, my legs were still silky smooth. And I said, it's awesome. I said, this is great. Like, instead of having to shave every single day, I said, I now have these perpetually soft, smooth, even kind of silky legs, and I don't have to deal with shaving. And I said, it's like a bright side effect, where a side effect of cancer treatment is the hair loss. And he's just like, wait a minute. He goes, what did you just say it was? And I go, what did I just say? I go, I guess it's kind of a bright side effect. I go, I'm looking on the bright side of these side effects. And he's like, that's way too cool. He goes, that's what we're going to write. He's like, let's write that song. And I'm like, okay. They always say in writing, write what you know. So we sat down and ended up writing this song called Bright Side Effects. It's a really unique idea. And from my website, cancerwithjoy.com, or on YouTube, if you just search Bright Side Effects, you'll actually find a little music video we made to the song that shares a lot of pictures from my journey and shares some of the contributors. I had some contributors contribute short stories to one chapter of the book, and you'll see some of the contributors, and you can actually hear that song, and you'll smile when you hear that part about I've got smooth legs. We said it's not all x-rays, bad days, and Kleenex. Turns out there's bright side effects. And again, just goes back to that idea of choosing your attitude. And, if you look for it, there can be a bright side, to just about anything.
That's great. We'll put links to that music, the YouTube version of that music video, in the show notes for this episode. So, Joy, how can our listeners find out more about you, your resources, your services, and your book?
Sure. Well, Cancer with Joy, it's basically everywhere. I worked with a publisher out in New York City on it, and so it's on Amazon. I know that's where a lot of people go and pick up a copy. A lot of people, they'll say, I need Joy right now. And I'm like, okay, it's on Kindle. It's available on the Nook. It's at a lot of Barnes & Noble stores. You can order it in there. If you want an autographed copy, those are available really through my website, cancerwithjoy.com. And we have a store link in there. And, also you might see me out somewhere at a book signing at a Barnes & Noble. Or if I speak, people can request to have me come speak at their church, their cancer treatment center, their hospital. And I can kind of, spread my cheer and deliver this message there. So those are great places to get the book. And I will tell you real quick, one thing I've really found is when I speak and I'm at the back of the room, people have been coming up to me and they're like, do you offer any one-on-one? We talked about Emmerman Angels being a great resource where you can get that one-on-one cancer support. And a lot of times I found people ask if I will, kind of be their angel or be their mentor, kind of coach them through the process. So what I ended up doing is I actually went back to school. I went through a coaching program called Coach U, where I could learn about working with individuals over time. And it's so incredibly rewarding for me. You meet these people at a speaking engagement, or they contact you through your website or something, and they just want to work with you. And they're like, can we talk to you like right before the first chemo and then, right after? And, you set up this schedule. And I've got a couple of openings right now for some new coaching clients, if people do want to work with me. So, I'll tell you what I'll do for your listeners is if someone's interested in like trying out a free, we could just talk for like a half an hour, kind of learn more about their situation, see if they'd be somebody I could help, by continuous coaching for several months. If they just want to email me with the subject line free session, I'll enter them, and we'll draw out a winner, to get a free coaching session. And they can just email Joy, Joy, at cancerwithjoy.com. And like I said, we'll see if we can help out some of your listeners that way, where they could just work one-on-one with me as they may be caring for someone going through this.
That's great, Joy. That's a very kind offer from you. And as we wrap up this show, as we always like to do, we want to ask you how you would recommend someone find their life's purpose. And you probably don't have to answer this after this interview, but what is your life's purpose?
I'd say mine is definitely, I want to deliver happiness. I know people go, oh, the pun, I want to give joy, literally, and figuratively, just really help others, find happiness as they're going from diagnosis through treatment. And, the way I found that, the way someone might stumble across their life's purpose is, this devastating thing happening to me. And then again, look at the good, that comes out of it. Shortly after I got in remission, I was just overpowered by this idea that said, hey, your name's Joy. You could bring joy to others, And I thought, I'm not the first Joy to have cancer and face it well. And, I had this idea of cancer with joy. And so I ran to the computer and pulled up the website, waiting to see what was going to be there, somebody probably already doing something with it. And there was nothing. And it was just a crazy feeling, spine tingling when I thought, wow, I think this is what you really were called to do, but for others, look at what you enjoy doing because, to me, I get so much passion and happiness out of helping others, out of helping those terminal families make the most of their last few months, or weeks. Look at what you're complimented for. Look at what you want to do when you have free time. I think that's a great way to find your purpose. What do you just find yourself naturally gravitating towards? Like when I have free time, I find myself on Twitter and I'm searching, just got diagnosed with cancer. I'm looking for people that are talking about, please pray for my grandma. She just got diagnosed with cancer. And I find myself tweeting, a helpful article, maybe one of my blogs from the Huffington Post to them, just in the hopes that I can save them some time and some energy and, help them not make the mistakes I did, like Googling. I want to tell them about cancer.net. So, yeah, hopefully this has been helpful for everyone listening in, and I sure appreciate all of your time.
Yeah, Joy, thanks so much for coming on the Conquer Worry Show. You are welcome back anytime. Folks, head out, pick up a copy of Cancer with Joy. We'll have all the links to everything we spoke about today in the show notes for this episode. Joy, thanks for coming on.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me. Have a great night.
It was a real pleasure to have Joy come on the show and talk about her experience with cancer. If you've just received a cancer diagnosis, or if you're going through treatments right now, check out some of the resources that Joy spoke about. And if somebody in your life is struggling, I don't think you would do them a disservice by sending them a copy of Joy's book, Cancer with Joy. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Conquer Worry Show.